I want to show you something that may very well turn your brain into soup, but let's check it out here. What I want to do is I want to show you what happens when we use the relative positioning value on a nested element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my red element here, my red div, and I'm going to drop it or nest it inside the blue div. So I'm going to flip back over to my code, go and look for the red div. There he is. And I'm going to cut him, and then I will paste him inside the blue div. Okay, so in the previous example, when we were messing around with absolute positioning, we put the blue inside the red. Now we're putting the red inside the blue. But it's basically the same concept, right? And maybe just to help me along here, what I'll do is I will adjust the width and height of the red div. I'll knock that down to 50 pixels each. Okay, so there it is, the red div sitting inside the blue div. Let's go ahead and save our code and flip back over to the browser and refresh. And there's the result that I get. I now have pretty much exactly what you and I had previously when we were working with absolute. So now the red object or the red element appears inside its parent element, in our case, a blue div. Okay, now the part that very well may turn your brain into soup is this. Earlier when I showed you this, when we were working with absolute, remember that initially the parent div, the outermost div, did not have an absolute property set on it. There was no positioning declaration set. So the inner, the child element, wound up positioning itself based off of the top right corner of the browser window, the page. And I said that if the parent element does not have a positioning property, then the parent element is ignored and the positioning is based off the top left corner of the page. Now that's not happening here, which is kind of bizarre. Here it's actually functioning. And if I flip back over to my code, notice that there is no positioning value set for the blue div. Okay? So in other words, when you're working with relatively positioned nested elements, even if the parent element does not have a positioning value, it still works. Now, why does it still work? It's because of the value that we're using, relative. It's positioning itself based off of the location that it appears on the page or inside the code. So inside the code, the red element, the red div, is sitting inside the blue div. So it's simply positioning itself based off of its original position on the page. That's the key to remember. That's how it all works. That's how relative positioning works. Once again, you may want to experiment a little bit. You may want to play around. You may decide to come into the actual parent div, the parent element, and throw a position on there. Maybe a position of absolute. So as a matter of fact, you can start to mix and match these guys, right? We can use different positioning values, different positioning settings, depending on what it is that we're trying to pull off. So maybe top and right, something like this. There we go. Save it up, refresh the browser, and now we wind up with something like this. So the blue parent div, in my case, is using absolute positioning off of the top and off of the right. And the red div, the child element, is just going along for the ride, right? He just simply places himself based on where he appears inside the code, or, again, said another way, where he's originally placed inside the page. Okay, so there you go. There's your relative positioning with nested elements.